we've been working on the resolutions. So the standard resolutions adopting the tree policy, requesting staff to update the council public-facing website. I'm happy for 3 to remain the way it was, and in fact, it should just have the words 2 community boards added to the end of it, and then we've changed the wording for the remainder, and then the final 2 ones are as per the one in front of us. So essentially the adoption of the tree policy, the essence of it, and the others are they're not required as part of the adoption of the tree policy, but they're all issues that were considered by the hearings panel, and we've looked at a way to make them a meaningful program of work so that staff can actually implement them. So and report back as required. So I don't know whether you want to, perhaps if you could circulate the final draft of that so councillors can put it up on their laptops if they wish to. And I'll open it up now to questions for staff, unless staff would like to comment at all. No, we've had the report from Yanni, so I'll open it up to questions from councillors. Sam.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick one, and I just thought it's useful if we can do this in public, particularly because it does affect our areas quite significantly. So 4.3, where it talks about tree removal will be considered where the tree is causing or likely to cause significant damage to buildings. Could you and the rest services property at that, can you just talk me through, if, because we get it raised, I've had 4 in the last sort of 7 days, if there's a tree on a berm that's either wrecking the footpath or creating uncertainty, this allows for that to be, I guess I'm trying to understand, what does the word considered mean in terms of the likelihood of that tree getting removed? So can someone just explain to me how that will work?
Yeah, so it depends on the extent of the damage, what engineering solutions are available, and whether the footpath or the property can be fixed without removing the tree. So there'll be a balancing act of what's the importance of the tree, the value of the tree versus the infrastructure around it, and how critical that infrastructure is to fix it.
Right, so and then just the only other one is around if you have that situation and the community board now have approval to, approval to remove the tree, how does that fit in with the rules within the district plan? So if we go down this process where a tree is causing significant issues, what would the likelihood be of that getting a consent if it's needed to remove it?
So there'll still be the district plan requirements. District plan. So you deal with this.
Yeah. So if I can comment. So yes, the district plan requirements are such that it could be a permitted activity if the damage was significant enough. So that's the sort of consistent wording with the policies. We're talking about the significance of damage to infrastructure, including buildings. So when we're talking about considering, as Toby's pointing out, we've got to take into a number of factors, and then whether it meets the permitted activities of the plan, and whether it's a staff delegation. So it could be a decision that's made by staff. If it's not even above that, then it probably doesn't meet any of those tests, and so it would come to the board for a decision.
One final one, Leanna. So just so I can be really, really clear, the policy now gives us, and again it's more for people that have raised it locally than necessarily answer it for myself, the policy now gives us a really clear framework on if there are issues outside somebody's home to work through how we remove that tree and replace it with something else. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And it'll be it's a pragmatic approach. We're not going to end up where we are now, where we have significant issues trying to move things along.
No, it's a pragmatic approach. It gives the community board really clear criteria of what to assess it on and how to come to an end decision.
Yep.
It doesn't mean you're going to get a binary result out the bottom, yes, no, I suspect, because if the tree is clearly causing damage to infrastructure, and there's a bit of a value for money equation going on here, can we mitigate that versus the in terms of the impact on infrastructure or not? a lot of those decisions are made under staff delegations, so you are going to get the trickier ones to deal with, but there are clear criteria for you to evaluate now, which were missing up until this time.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? James?
Very briefly, and it's just for my own clarity here. So in the event that we're gone through actually just what Sam had just articulated, and the community board was of a mind to make the decision for that tree to be removed, actually, am I correct that that's a decision, or because it's outside of the policy, is that then a recommendation to council, just at that point?
Well, it's probably a legal question, actually. Is Lydia around? No, she's gone.
It's a delegation one, I guess.
Typically, if community boards are making decisions that are not consistent with council policy,
Yes.
it would be a part A.
Yep. So that's a recommendation then that then goes to council for them to make the decision.
Yeah. It's a pretty safe assumption.
Yep. Okay.
Aaron?
Now, just as a follow-on from Sam and James, so if a community board decides to remove a tree, does that then trigger a resource consent, and if so, who pays?
And it would only be in some circumstances, because some trees aren't protected.
So only the ones with the orange tags it would require? Because I thought under the district plan, once over a number of metres,
Yes.
that's it, you're protected.
They are protected.
That's
Yes.
what I mean. They have to be a certain size,
Mm.
etc., etc.
Well, it's basically just in the power lines and that's it, they're protected. They
Well,
make it, they're free.
yeah.
So then that would require resource consent, so
It
now it
would.
costs thousands of dollars to remove a tree, so we're really not much further along.
Well, before they
Except
get,
we got to say, can we remove the tree?
it's gone through a whole lot of checks and balances before it gets to you generally. So we deal with the majority of them, and yes, when they come through to you, we would have looked at all the other engineering possibilities for retention of the tree, or whether that damage, if you're talking about damage to infrastructure, whether it is critical, and it would have gone through that assessment already before it came to the community board to make that decision. But yes, if the community board decides to make the
And the
decision
same as the
for
question the
removal,
other day, yeah, then the report, because the report will normally say, this tree is healthy, it stays, unless they're really manky, like the ones in Belfast, don't even know the ones I mean, but majority will pass the test and be recommended to stay. But if the community board's of a mind to still remove that tree,
there will be a resource consent requirement.
and
Yes.
what's the cost of that?
It depends on the processing fee.
And it will, that then, is the community board allowed to pay for that, or the council, or?
Don't know the answer to whether the
I
community
think-
board are allowed
think
to pay for it.
For the community board to make a well-informed decision, I think it'll be important for us to put those facts in front of the community board. What is the true cost?
Right, so the problems that have been raised for the last several years don't really get solved today, do they?
I don't know the problems that you've been dealing with the last several years, but it is a case-by-case basis, yes.
I think remembering too, there's not that many. I know you, different boards get different types of inquiries. We're not talking hundreds of reports coming through to you. Yeah, it's exceptions.
Mm.
Can I just be really clear for members? We had a policy that wasn't a policy, that has not been in the council for, well, it depends which years you want to take, 18 or 25 years. We now have for you a clear policy which we can then assess against the requests, wherever they may come from, and they will either pass the tests or they won't. But there is also a clear line in which decisions can be made. They will go to the community boards, advice will be given by officers. Clearly that needs to be, and I think Councillor McDonough's word is right, pragmatic and fair, weighing up all factors. You will be given that information at community board level. You will then be able to see whether you agree with that advice. If the advice is to remove and you agree with that or not, and if the advice is to keep and you disagree, then there is a route to come to council as I understand it. Yeah. So clear policy in which to be able to act.
I had Sarah, but you finish your questioning because that was an interruption, I guess.
It was an addition, but so it doesn't seem really any different to what we've had, because we're still going to go through the same you still need a resource consent if it's, is it 6 metres, Tony?
For street tree.
Yeah, for a street tree,
For
yeah.
street tree, 6 metres, park trees, 10 metres.
Yeah, 6 and 10, yeah.
I think it's important to recognise that within the district plan rules, what's a permitted activity allows council to undertake work as an operational activity. So the policy tries to clarify what those permitted activities are by spelling out, under these circumstances, we will remove trees, and those circumstances where we won't, which will then require resource consent, and then potentially go to the board also to make a decision. I can't imagine many circumstances where they will then go on to council to further that, because the policy allows for those criteria to be considered by the board to make that decision. Because the whole purpose of the policy is to clarify that whole decision-making process. If it doesn't, then...
So when the tree's on our land damaging someone else's property, who's paying for the resource consent?
A resource consent may not be required if it meets the test of being permitted activity, yeah.
And if it
There has to
doesn't?
be significant damage, yeah, which would need to be assessed or considered. And that's a case-by-case scenario. But typically for roading infrastructure, footpaths, curb and channel is considered to be low-level infrastructure.
Right.
We can fix it through our maintenance. What we're talking about then is significant infrastructure which has a sort of health and safety purpose, or then damages to private property, which is then a matter we have to deal with the private resident over.
Right, so we're okay with the damage to our property?
Well, we have to understand that trees...
Yeah, I'm just finding where the line is, that's all.
Yeah. It's understanding the damage. And
Yeah.
it's low-level damage, there's degrees of significance.
We're getting into very specific and you know,
It's all subjective. but-
non-defined sort of matters, but I understand what you're trying to do. What the guys are trying to explain is that you have criteria now by which you can assess that you didn't have in the past.
Right. Yeah, because we have 4 and 5 inch tripping hazards in our wards that people complain about constantly, and I mean, do we need an ACC report? Like,
There's a definition of a tripping hazard.
how many
that we would
inches
take
is a
into-
tripping
It
hazard?
might be quite helpful because, I mean, obviously you're talking from the benefit of experiencing the representations to your board and not feeling that the lack of a policy was able to achieve anything. I mean, I've just wondered whether we could take the 2 particular examples that you've raised offline and see whether
Test
we
them.
can test them against the policy, because that might short track or fast track
We do
a
have some.
conversation.
Oh, sorry. We do have some specific things around repairs for footpath,
Yeah.
around pruning routes to allow that if it is a threat to
Yeah,
public
it's quite clear in the new
So,
policy.
Yeah, so we've
Yep.
got some really clear statements around that. Also around when we would removal would be triggered to repair infrastructure around it, and that would depend on the infrastructure and the value of the tree. So we have addressed that within the policy as well.
But it might be that walking through the actual examples with
Absolutely.
the particular community board or the ward councillor would solve that problem.
You may recall at the briefing, Toby mentioned that he'll be going to the joint community board
Yeah.
seminar and then available to work with community boards. So we'll take live examples through a scenario, so you can sort of see it in action. Yep.
But I think there's nothing like the 2 irritants for the councillor to actually see how the policy would apply.
Absolutely.
We'll take
Sarah.
a chainsaw when we go to Aaron's community board.
Yeah. Sarah,
Thank you. Just to get an idea, I know we have people come around, you know, and prune trees on and off around the neighbourhood and things. How much does it cost council to remove a large tree in the street, like on the berm? So with contractors, traffic management, all of those kind of things. What are some of the types of costs that you've seen in relatively recent times to remove a tree?
The contracts presently are priced on a schedule of rates, so
Yeah.
there is a fixed price.
Yeah. So depending on the tree
on the size of tree.
yeah.
The road
But a mature
highlighting,
tree-
level of road, level 2, level 1.
So a mature tree on like a neighbourhood street.
Okay, typically about, and then if you include in total costs, stump
Yep.
grinding, etc.,
All of that.
replacement costs, traffic management thrown in, I think it's about $1,500–2,000.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Including replacing a tree, or just reinstatement to the ground?
To including the stump and then replacements on top of that. If it's a standard tree, the $2,000 mark.
Okay.
The traffic management component.
Everyone's going, that sounds really cheap. So what sort of size tree is that?
That is an over 10 metre size tree.
Wow, that's really cheap. Council gets good rates. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, we do.
Oh, touche.
And what about
She's comparing it
replacement?
to the retail rate, which
What
I know from
replacement?
experience is considerably more than that.
It's almost as, because of the maintenance,
Yeah, yeah,
it's almost as much as removal, about the
Yeah.
same.
yeah. Thanks.
All right, are there any more questions for staff? Now, are we able to, Yanni, are you able to see a way clear to moving this as a bulk set of resolutions, or does that not work for you?
What have you done to 8 in terms of the bottom one?
Sorry?
Okay.
We've got an email.
I've added in enabling these issues to be considered as part of the tree policy implementation and development of the urban forest plan. So I've repeated the words from the one above so that it's quite clear that in looking at potential changes to the district plan, that we're reviewing that at the moment under the MPS UD requirements, but this will enable that information to be dealt with this year as part of the tree policy.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a clear time frame for when we can get briefed on that, not the actual plan change.
Yeah, I'm not going to put a date in. I just don't want to put a date in right now. But we can circulate a memo on the time frame.
Well, I'm not
afterwards.
happy with 8. Apart from it, the rest are fine.
All right. Well, then
I'll move. I can move it.
so
Are you happy with 8?
you're happy
No
to
time
move
frame.
it, and you're happy to second it. We'll just put in a request for the additional information for.
Look, I trust those staff.
Yeah.
I'm happy with
Sorry?
it. Move it.
Sorry, sorry, you're moving it and you're seconding it. So I'll just open it up for debate. So Melanie, would you like to kick off the debate?
I wasn't really going to say too much. I mean, we had a good hearings experience, I thought, and we spent quite a lot of time working through this, and you can see all the wording changes. Yet me and Yanni between us had like 50 questions, and it took hours. So, and what we tried to do with all those requests or noting provisions was to try and address like all the things that people came to us to talk about. And the two I wanted to just mention in this debate was one was about trees and berms. People talked about that having, and there's been another one we've had an email about just now where there's trees and berms, they get taken out, people want them replaced, but then they can't be replaced because of underground services being too close. And so that was why we wanted to make sure that sort of watched for the future, because people want trees in their streets, especially when their street's called Tall Tree Ave, for instance. And then the other point was a lot of people came talking about natives versus exotics, and a lot of people want to see natives. And of course that's part of, you know, I tried multiple ways to get Toby to add in wording around having indigenous trees, looked at first, but we do now have the wording in 1.3 about including council's other plans and strategic objectives, so that will cover the urban forest plan when that's done, and I'm hoping that will be done quite quickly because people are very passionate about this, including my community board chairperson, as we know. Otherwise, I think it's good that we've got this policy, and I'm happy to support it in all these other provisions as well.
Sarah?
Thank you. Trees have an enormous value to a city, and they provide valuable services such as rain interception, they provide habitat, visual amenity, and they provide shade. And they provide shade not just for people, but also to the road surface and help with roading maintenance and all the expense of that over time. Individual trees, however, can cause a nuisance to individual residents. Leaves on roofs, a root coming, causing uplift on the footpath, those kind of things. But these things can be fixed by regular maintenance. Trees have a value. They have their intrinsic value, but also an accumulated value to council and ratepayers in the purchase, planting and ongoing maintenance. And from the time on the tree policy working group a few years ago, many larger trees will have had up to $20,000 spent on them to get them to a large size. And there are costs of removal, as we've heard, although it sounds like council gets a much better rate than regular residents, which is great. Contractors, traffic management, and then to replant. Boards have struggled with this for years. They haven't had a proper framework to be able to assess things against, and this gives them that. And while I understand the individual frustrations about individual trees, if this policy made it easy to remove trees, I have no doubt that boards would be inundated and we would quickly drop our canopy cover from 11% to something even more disastrous.
Look, thanks, Sarah. Well said. I'd really, this is an auspicious day actually, because it has been a long time coming. And I like the resolution. I like the way that we've managed to compromise and get these future works built in. And this is, well, it's a growing policy, let's say that. But particularly, I'd like to thank Yanni and Melanie for the incredible amount of work that you put in. I know it nearly drove you mad, but you have put in a huge amount of work for us on this. So I'd really like to express thanks for doing that, and appreciate that this is an auspicious day. Thanks to you guys. So I'll support it.
Yanni, do you?
So, thank you. I just want to start off with a quote, which is, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. That's from the Lorax, right? That was an overwhelming sentiment from the submitters. What we were told very clearly is that people value trees, but that we have a huge problem. We have a huge problem in the fact that a huge number of trees post-earthquake have been lost, and that we need to act with some urgency and some care. Here's just to quote one of the submissions. I've lived in the inner city for 12 years. I've seen a large number of established trees fell. The reason given are always the trees are unhealthy. The remaining stumps and branches show otherwise. I'm outraged at the recent felling of around 8 healthy trees from the red zone around River Road and Avonside Drive. Now there is no shade, birds have lost valuable nesting places. For a so-called garden city, I feel we're headed in the wrong direction. Since the earthquakes, we have had wanton destruction and removal of many prime trees by both council and developers. What's really clear is that post-earthquake in the planning environment that we had, instead of taking an opportunity to protect our trees, we weakened our tree protection. We now have one of the lowest levels of tree canopy cover compared to other major cities in New Zealand. We do need to act urgently, not just on public realm, but on private realm as well. And that's why I'm disappointed in number 8, to have no clear date or time frame to act with urgency to care about the protection of trees within our city. You can see the developments happening in the suburbs, and especially in the medium residential areas, where whole sites are just being absolutely cleared of mature trees. And what we heard through the tree policy is that it will take decades and decades for the carbon that's been lost to be replenished by what's proposed to be replanted, if it ever does at all. So we are making some subtle changes to our tree policy to require, when we do things on public land, to provide a greater carbon compensation, and I think that's to be welcomed. So the idea of 2 for 1 isn't actually just 2 for 1, it is actually about the time taken to get the loss of the environmental impact restored.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to just finalise with 3 points. One is, what's really clear is we need good data, and there's a resolution to do it. We need a better model of valuation that acknowledges the environmental benefits of trees, and we do need to look at our private, our district planning around trees on private property. Thank you.
I'll put the motion. All those, and if you'd like yours, number 8, recorded differently. Okay. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. How do you want me to record item 8 then?
Can you just do a omission provision?
Just a note, yeah.
I mean, I support it in principle, but
Support, yeah. Can we just note that, yeah. Thank you, thanks very much. And thank you to staff too, that's, it's been a journey.
My first week in council, went to the community boards and they said to me,